Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. At Lincoln High School, nestled in the heart of a small American town where everything seemed almost frozen in time, life followed a tranquil rhythm. The walls of the red brick buildings bore the traces of decades of history, and the hallways echoed with the hurried footsteps of students, hushed laughter, and secret whispers exchanged between friends. The teachers, meanwhile, busied themselves in their classrooms, carefully preparing their lessons, marking homework, exchanging knowing, sometimes weary, glances. It was an immutable routine, a reassuring balance for all, like a gentle melody that no one wanted to interrupt. But beneath this apparent tranquility, silent tensions lurked, invisible to visitors or new students. Lincoln High, despite its strong academic performance and family atmosphere, was also a microcosm of American society, a place where social differences, quick judgments, and prejudices could sometimes strain relationships. In this context, it only took a small grain of sand to derail the well-oiled machine of school life. Harold Jenkins, the school's old caretaker, was a discreet but omnipresent figure. For over 30 years, he had seen generations of students pass through the school, from unruly teenagers to young adults ready to conquer the world. Harold knew every corner of the buildings, every creak of the old floorboards, every anecdote hidden in the walls. But he himself remained in the shadows, invisible to many, despite his constant presence. A simple man in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and work-stained hands, Harold wasn't one to attract attention. He always wore worn clothes, an old cap sometimes tilted to one side, and a discreet smile that he offered to the few people who bothered to greet him. His step was slow, measured, almost contemplative, as if he were absorbing every detail around him. Yet, behind this apparent simplicity lay a wealth of experience and wisdom. Harold had never been a man comfortable with numbers or academics. His school career had been brief and difficult. Coming from a modest family, he had to drop out at 16 to help his parents provide for the family. The days of school were behind him, replaced by days of toil and sacrifice. But far from being a hindrance, this harsh life had forged in him a practical intelligence, an ability to observe and understand the world differently. Harold knew how to read between the lines, detect what the words didn't say, listen to the silences. He had learned to solve problems not with complex theorems, but with common sense, patience, and a deep empathy for others. This intelligence, often ignored or scorned, allowed him to navigate the complexity of human relationships with rare finesse. And on that day, as the school seemed to be drifting into its usual peaceful rhythm, Harold would unknowingly become the center of an event that would shake more than just the walls of Lincoln High. What initially seemed like a simple challenge from a teacher would turn into a profound lesson, challenging the very prejudices and values of the school community. That morning, in room 204, a low hubbub drifted as the advanced mathematics students settled into their desks. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting shifting patterns on the tables. Professor David Marshall, a stern-faced man in his 50s, wore his trademark crisp white shirt and rectangular glasses. His reputation was well established, rigid and demanding. He accepted no deviations and pushed his students to the limit. His classes were feared, but respected. That day, he decided to spice things up. On the blackboard, he carefully wrote a particularly complex calculus problem, a mathematical puzzle worthy of elite competitions, combining algebra, analytical geometry, and a touch of analysis. A real pet peeve for most of the students. He distributed the printed statement, insisting that the solution must be submitted before the end of the day. Some students exchanged worried glances, while others smiled, daring the teacher to impress them. Just as he was about to turn away, David Marshall's gaze slid toward the door, where Harold Jenkins, the old janitor, was passing by, pushing his cleaning cart. Harold paused for a moment by the blackboard, gently wiping the chalk away with a habitual gesture. The professor then approached him, a wry smile tinged with a hint of barely concealed mockery. In a loud voice that echoed throughout the room, he said, "Harold, if you can solve this problem, then maybe you have what it takes to teach here." A general burst of laughter rose among the students. Some openly mocked, others exchanged astonished glances, surprised that the teacher would address such a challenge to the janitor. Harold, for his part, felt a mixture of embarrassment and awkwardness overcome him. He wasn't used to being so exposed to everyone's gaze, especially in a field that had always seemed inaccessible to him. Yet, despite his hesitation, he did not give up. In a soft, almost timid voice, he simply replied, "Well, I'll try." Silence fell, filled with a peculiar sense of expectation. The professor returned to his desk, an almost predatory smile on his lips, convinced that the challenge would remain unanswered. But for Harold, this moment marked the beginning of an unexpected path, a personal challenge that went far beyond a simple mathematical problem. All day long, in the halls and hallways of Lincoln High, an air of excitement reigned among the students in the advanced placement math class. The complex problem assigned by Professor Marshall was the subject of many animated discussions. Some groups exchanged hypotheses. Others debated the best method for isolating variables, calculating derivatives, or proving geometric relationships. The whiteboards filled with formulas and hastily scribbled equations, while calculators clicked incessantly. But in a more discreet corner of the school, Harold Jenkins had withdrawn to a small, dusty office, rarely used by the students. Sitting at an old wooden table, he held a notebook with a worn cover, in which he slowly scribbled, sometimes erasing, and then starting again. Unlike the younger students, Harold hadn't learned the latest mathematical theories or complex formulas. He had never had access to modern textbooks or specialized courses. His method was different. He listened to the problem, analyzed it calmly, without rushing. He thought deeply, letting his thoughts wander, trying to see beyond the numbers. Harold drew on his experience, his ability to look at things from a practical perspective, to break a problem down into simple elements, to look for logic where others saw only abstract symbols. He recalled years spent solving practical problems, repairing an old boiler, organizing a school day despite unforeseen circumstances, handling emergencies calmly. This form of thinking, sometimes mocked as too simple or unacademic, was actually a hidden strength. Hours passed. The sun was slowly setting, casting long shadows across the windows. Harold, tired but determined, continued to explore different avenues, writing down each idea, each hypothesis, until he found a solution that seemed solid to him. When the bell finally rang to end the class gathered in room 204. Professor Marshall, a mixture of curiosity and skepticism in his eyes, addressed Harold. "So, Harold, did you find an answer?" Harold stood up, his face serene, a slight smile on his lips. He approached the board, picked up the chalk, and began to slowly trace his solution. But what he revealed was not a succession of classical theorems or academic calculations. It was an original, intuitive, almost artistic approach based on practical logic, a simplification of complex data into tangible elements. Each step was explained clearly, with a precision that revealed a deep understanding, far beyond simple numbers. A stunned silence fell. The students stared at Harold with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Some exchanged glances, realizing that their understanding of intelligence had been shattered. Professor Marshall, usually so sure of himself, stood frozen in front of the blackboard. Then, slowly, almost reluctantly, he spoke these words that sounded like a victory to Harold. "Harold, your answer is correct. And your method is remarkable." Murmurs rippled through the room, and for the first time, everyone understood that intelligence wasn't limited to degrees, years of study, or traditional methods. It could also come from experience, patience, and a fresh perspective. From that day on, life at Lincoln High took a new turn, driven by the unlikely story of Harold Jenkins. The janitor, long discreet and almost invisible to many, suddenly became a respected and admired figure, even a living symbol of the unsuspected wealth of human knowledge. Professor David Marshall, who had never expected Harold to impress him, was deeply touched by the humility and wisdom of this simple man. He realized that his own strictly academic and often harsh outlook had been too narrow. During a meeting with the teaching staff, he proposed a bold initiative, bringing Harold in to lead reflection workshops for struggling students, those who struggled to find their place in an often rigid school system. These workshops were unlike anything anyone had ever experienced. Harold spoke not with fancy words or abstract theories, but with examples from everyday life, anecdotes, and simple but powerful questions that invited reflection. He taught students to observe, to step back, and to break down complex problems into manageable elements. His method resonated deeply with those who had previously doubted their abilities. The impact was immediate and palpable. Students who participated in his workshops regained confidence, developed a newfound curiosity, and dared to ask questions that many were afraid to ask. Gradually, the school's culture changed. People began to understand that education was not measured solely by exams, grades, or diplomas, but also by the ability to think differently, to learn from life, to adapt, and above all, to never underestimate anyone. Harold, meanwhile, continued his work as a janitor with renewed enthusiasm. Every morning, he greeted students and teachers with a kind smile, aware that his presence now had greater meaning. He became a silent source of inspiration, a living example that true intelligence is not confined to school benches, but is enriched by experience, curiosity, and the courage to face challenges. His answer to the famous calculation wasn't just a simple mathematical result. It was a powerful message, a lesson in humility for the entire school community. Sometimes, those we think are invisible, those whose value we go unnoticed, are the ones with the greatest lessons to teach. And that truth, once heard, forever transformed Lincoln High.